Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. Today, the 5th of June, marks the World Environment Day, and this occasion is used as a platform by the United Nations to promote environmental awareness and to inspire action against climate change and global warming. The 5th of June was designated as the World Environment Day in 1972 to mark the beginning of the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment, which was the first ever major environment related summit under the UN, and it also led to the establishment of the UNEP, or the United Nations Environment Programme. So, to mark this occasion, the Hindu carries two important columns on page number 6, and let's look at them one by one. The first column, written by Mr. Kamal Baba, is related to biodiversity. In this column, the writer evaluates the role of biodiversity and its contribution to human life, and he talks about the need to save and protect our biodiversity in order to secure our future. See, in very simple terms, biodiversity is nothing but the variety of life that can be found on Earth. This biodiversity can be measured at three different levels. At the very bottom of the ecological pyramid, at the level of each individual species, we can find genetic diversity. Genetic diversity within a species, in turn, gives rise to species diversity, that is, the presence of different types of flora and fauna within a given ecosystem. Such species diversity, in turn, strengthens ecosystem diversity at the ecosystem level, and all aspects of biodiversity, including our forests, wetlands, grasslands, deserts, and marine ecosystems, they all directly contribute to overall societal well being, and they not only play a role in the socio-economic development of humans, but they also play a direct role in ensuring the physical and mental well being of humans. India is one of the countries that is blessed with very rich biodiversity. Even though India accounts for just 2.3% of the global land area, it accounts for 8% of the global biodiversity, and it is home to 4 out of the 36 biodiversity hotspots that have been identified around the world. See, these sources of biodiversity, they provide numerous ecosystem-based services which play a direct role in the societal well-being and as well as in our physical and mental well-being. The various aspects of biodiversity, including these ecosystems and the various species, they all guarantee our food security, and they also play a critical role in protecting and ensuring human health. They even provide numerous economic services, including the sustenance of livelihoods, because the various resources of biodiversity found in our forests, in our marine ecosystems, in our wetlands, they can be exploited for the economic benefit of humans. And upon this, they not only provide recreational services, but they even provide spiritual services. For example, look at the spiritual connection that many indigenous tribal communities have with their biodiversity. So it is this connection or relationship between humans and their nature which serves as the very foundation of societal well being and the physical and mental well being of humans. In this relationship, a sense of balance is maintained only when the resource exploitation is done in a sustainable manner. But the moment you breach the limits of sustainability, and the moment economic greed takes over and results in unsustainable development, it will result in the unsustainable exploitation of biodiversity resources. And this not only depletes our resources, but it also directly contributes to climate change and global warming. And as the pandemic has clearly shown, overexploitation of resources and our failure to conserve our environment and biodiversity can even result in the breakout of deadly diseases. Because at the end of the day, human health is connected to the health of our nature. It is connected to the health of our biodiversity. Human health is integral and connected to all the other flora and fauna, including microscopic pathogens. The pandemic has clearly exposed how this relationship between humanity and nature has become dysfunctional today as a direct result of our unsustainable exploitation of our biodiversity resources. So, in this regard, biodiversity conservation and protection is extremely crucial for guaranteeing our future. And this is at the very heart of the objectives that have been laid down under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and as well as under the CBD Convention or the Convention on Biological Diversity. To fulfill these targets and to help India conserve its rich biodiversity, the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-being was approved in 2018 by the Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. This national mission is being led by the Environment Ministry along with several other key institutions, including the National Biodiversity Authority that has been set up under the Biodiversity Act of 2002. And the execution of this mission involves active collaboration with all concerned stakeholders, including other government ministries and institutions, the private sector, the civil society, environment conservation organizations, NGOs, think tanks, the academia, etc. Under this mission, a roadmap is being laid out to help save and protect India's rich biodiversity, which in turn will help India in achieving the targets of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and as well as the objectives that have been laid out under the Convention on Biological Diversity. This national mission provides for a holistic framework and an integrated approach that is built on the spirit of societal participation. It provides for a community model for conservation and it introduces the One Health concept under which human health is seen to be integrated and connected with the overall health of our biodiversity and human health including food security and even our agricultural productivity is seen to be connected with the overall health of our soil, our water systems, the biotic composition found in the soil and its fertility, and as well as with all the other flora and fauna that are a part of our biodiversity. So this equates human health with the health of our environment and the priority being given to the One Health concept under the National Mission on Biodiversity could just be the right kind of approach that India is looking for in order to combat climate change and promote the conservation of its sensitive biodiversity against unsustainable exploitation. To achieve these ambitious objectives, India will also require trained human resources, that is, a readily available pool of professionals who are trained in the science of sustainability and biodiversity sciences. And the national mission lays down a holistic roadmap to enable the creation of such a pool of human resource. So, in conclusion, the writer is of the opinion that this national biodiversity mission can help India to repair and mend the dysfunctional relationship that has developed between humanity and nature. Next, we have another column on the same page, which highlights the significance of immediate climate action measures that are needed in order to mitigate the impact of global warming. This column is written by Alok Sharma, who is an Indian origin British politician who currently has been appointed as the president to COP26 or the 26th Conference of Parties to the Climate Change Convention. This year's Climate Change Summit, that is COP26, is being held in United Kingdom, and this platform offered under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is critical for working out immediate measures in order to tackle the impact of global warming and climate change. See, under the UN Climate Change Convention in 2015, the historic Paris Agreement was worked out, which currently is the key agreement that is pushing governments towards climate action, and it allows respective governments to implement their voluntary contributions, or also known as INDCs, that is intended nationally determined contributions, in order to bring down their greenhouse gas emissions and further promote their switch towards renewable forms of energy. Under this agreement, an ambitious target has been laid down to limit the global average rising temperatures to under 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, and if possible, to limit the global rise in temperature to under 1.5 degrees Celsius in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. See, when it comes to climate action targets, every fraction of the percentage counts because climate science has clearly shown that even a zero point 0.5 degree Celsius difference can have an enormous impact. And let's say the world fails to achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius target and only sticks to a 2 degree Celsius target, then based on the current path we are taking, we are going to keep the global temperatures limited to only under 2.4 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial levels. And this would directly affect millions of people around the world, especially the vulnerable population. So the president of COP26 urges the countries around the world to strive towards the 1.5 degrees Celsius target and not to settle for the 2 degrees Celsius target. In his column, he praises India for the considerable progress that the country has made with regard to the adoption of renewable energy. Over the last 1 decade, India has almost increased its solar and wind capacity by 4 times. And this illustrates the massive transition that India is making towards the adoption of clean and renewable forms of energy. The writer points out that thanks to the effort of the Government of India, in collaboration with India's civil society, and as well as the private organizations and conservation groups, India has been making considerable progress with regard to climate action over the last 20 to 30 years. And the results of these efforts are already visible and have been brought out through Indian initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance, and as well as through its ambitious renewable energy target of achieving 450 gigawatts of installed capacity through renewable forms by 2030. In line with this proactive approach of India, Prime Minister Modi announced the CDRI initiative during the 2019 Climate Summit, under which India is promoting a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure in order to mitigate the impact of climate change and protect vulnerable communities from the impact of natural disasters and extreme weather events which are being driven by climate change and global warming. Under this initiative, India has been pushing countries around the world, including the United Kingdom, to focus on disaster resilient infrastructure so that the loss of life and property during disasters and extreme weather events can be minimized. The writer says that if we are to achieve this ambitious target under the Paris Agreement, and if we have to focus on the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, then the next 2 decades are going to be extremely crucial. To achieve the target of keeping global rise in temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius, first we need to focus on reducing global emissions by almost 50% by the end of this decade. So this would require immediate action from countries around the world, including by both developed and developing nations. Then in the medium term, to achieve this target, we need to aim to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, that is by the middle of the century. And many developed countries, especially European countries, are already committing to net zero targets. He also points out that at COP26, it's very important to bring out the benefits of green transition because generally it is assumed that climate action and economic growth are contradictory objectives. The traditional assumption is that when you try to focus on climate action and when you try to bring down emissions, it will automatically compromise your economic growth. But under the new model of climate action, which is focused on renewable energy, this need not be the case because the massive investments that will go into the clean and renewable sector will trigger new kinds of economic activities and generate millions of jobs and also help the world in tackling other problems such as pollution. So with these focus areas in mind, the writer lays down 4 goals or 4 targets for the upcoming climate change summit. One, he hopes that during this summit, a clear-cut roadmap will be drawn out by the member countries to focus on the ambitious target of Paris Agreement, that is to limit the global rise in temperatures to under 1.5 degrees Celsius. For this, countries will have to commit towards net zero emissions, and this action has to be taken within this decade. Second, the members will have to strive towards mitigating the impact of extreme weather events, which is honestly going up as a direct result of climate change and global warming. And disasters such as cyclones, floods, droughts are going to go up, and governments will have to work together to mitigate the impact of these disasters, especially on vulnerable communities. Then the third goal for the upcoming climate change summit should be to put in place the promised climate finance from the developed nations towards the developing and underdeveloped nations. See, developed countries have committed to provide around $100 billion in funding every year to developing and underdeveloped countries to enable their transition towards clean and renewable forms of energy. This allows the developed countries to be held accountable for their historical responsibilities and for their historical emissions. And through such transfer of finance and technology, that can help out the smaller countries, including developing and underdeveloped nations, to adopt cleaner and renewable forms of energy. So, making this climate finance commitment work would be one of the top priorities of the upcoming climate change summit. Then, finally, the last goal for the president of the climate change summit is to promote consensus and build international collaboration and cooperation amongst governments, private businesses, civil society, and conservation organizations to ensure that the best possible efforts are taken at the upcoming climate change summit in order to address the enormous threat being posed by climate change. Next, we have an editorial on page number 6 that is related to the Niti Aayog's SDG India Index, which was covered in detail in our yesterday's analysis. So I kindly request you to go through this editorial once. Then finally, we have a couple of articles on page number 1 and 8 that refers to the latest decisions that have been taken by the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI. In its latest quarterly review, the MPC, that is headed by the governor of the RBI, has decided to keep the benchmark interest rates, that is the repo rate, unchanged in order to retain the accommodative stance that the RBI and the MPC have adopted with regard to their monetary policy in order to keep it aligned towards pro-growth agenda. Considering that the pandemic and the lockdowns have severely affected India's growth numbers, the RBI and the MPC have consistently adopted an accommodative stance in the monetary policy over the last few months in order to provide the required stimulus for economic growth. At the same time, the RBI is keeping a close watch on the inflation situation, and by noting that inflationary pressure has gone down slightly over the last few weeks, the RBI has gained enough monetary space to continue its accommodative approach towards growth. Hence, the repo rate, the benchmark policy rate, has been retained at 4%, while the CPI inflation target for this year has been increased marginally to 5.1%. This would still be within the inflation target that has been provided to the Monetary Policy Committee, which has been mandated to maintain inflation at 4% with a range of plus or minus 2%. Then, in line with the national statistics, RBI has also revised its GDP forecast to 9.5%, and it has cut the GDP forecast by almost 100 basis points, that is by 1 percentage point, by keeping in mind the impact of the second wave of the pandemic and the lockdowns on India's economic growth. Along with that, the RBI has been keeping a close watch on rising international crude oil prices, and as well as the surge witnessed in global commodity prices and logistics cost, which could have a direct impact on consumer inflation in India. The RBI is also aware of the upside risks posed to the supply chain as a result of the lockdowns, and it expects that as the second wave is on the decline, the lockdown restrictions will be slowly relaxed, which should help in easing this pressure on the supply chains. So, in the medium to long run, the RBI maintains a positive outlook over India's growth trajectory. But however, keeping in mind the short-term constraints, the RBI has retained its accommodative stance towards economic growth, and hence the repo rate has been retained at 4%. Now let's look at a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: the National Biodiversity Mission can help mend the dysfunctional relationship between humanity and nature. Examine the statement. The second question: the time to limit global warming is melting away. So what can nations do at the upcoming COP26 to address the enormous threat of climate change? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.